Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show. Well, hey there, folks. Brian Nichols here on another fun-filled episode, yes, of The Brian Nichols Show. I am, as always, your humble host, joining you from our lovely Cardio Miracle Studios here in sunny Eastern Indiana. The Brian Nichols Show is powered by the best heart health supplement in the world, Cardio Miracle. So if you want to learn how to lower your resting heart rate, lower your blood pressure while improving your pump at the gym, stick around. We're going to talk about that more later in today's episode. But first, we're talking the negatives of heart health, the negatives of lung health, the negatives of overall health, and that is smoking. But with that, a little bit different perspective, because we all acknowledge the elephant in the room. Smoking's bad for you. But how do government politicians and policymakers actually dictate policy to help steer behavior? Should they be doing that? We look over in the United Kingdom, or rather in the EU, that is. In the EU, they're right now trying to discuss the idea of putting in a very large tax on smoking. So we want to look at that. Is that a good idea? Is that going to end up causing more unintended consequences? Let's dig into that. Joining us here on the show to discuss all this and more is Ian Golan. Ian, welcome to the Brian Nichols Show. How you doing?
It's a pleasure to be with you, Brian.
Great to have you, Ian. Peek behind the curtain, folks. We've been sitting here for about 15 minutes before we could get ready to rock and roll because my computer decided to just lock me out. So that was a nice little time we were hanging out here just chit-chatting. But otherwise, Ian, I'm really excited to dig into our conversation today. I think there's a lot to unpack. But before we get into topic at hand, smoking and how policymakers can try to steer public behavior. Should they be steering public behavior? Do us a favor, introduce yourself here to the Brian Nichols Show audience, and why you're focusing here specifically on how government can use policy to steer social behavior.
Yeah, so I'm Ian Golan. I'm the executive publisher of Speak Freely magazine, which is a magazine run by Students for Liberty in Europe, and we fight for liberty in all sorts of aspects where it's threatened in Europe. So we fight against conscription, we fight against the nanny state, which is our topic today here, where the European Union tries to coddle its citizens, tries to tell us what to do, how to live our lives. It has this sort of also our nation states also have this war on fun. They want to fight, where they want to ban alcohol, they want to limit our usage of tobacco, of certain nice drugs and such. So the nanny state is a topic I'm quite interested in.
Well, let's dig into that, right? You mentioned the term, the banning of fun. And I come from a world, I was a heavy drinker for a number of years. I decided, about 4 years ago to put that to the side, and I haven't had a drink since. But I partake in other things. I leverage CBD, I leverage Delta 8, like all these different substances to help me, with my aches and pains, or just to relax at the end of the day. But I look at, the comparison of that substance versus alcohol, or maybe other substances in the world of air quotes fun, right? Like smoking cigarettes. And I guess that the real question at the root of today's conversation is harm, right? When you look at these substances, what is the very real harm that's being passed down to the end consumer? And then the other question that sneaks in, Ian, and that is, what is the responsibility of society by and large to now pay for or to help those individuals who are using substances that do have objectively negative consequences from a health standpoint, but also the unintended consequences, or the unintended areas where other pieces of society are impacted, like our healthcare system, for example, where you're now dealing with people who have higher comorbidities, higher issues in their overall health. So I think, just to kind of set the stage today, that is really the underlying argument, right?
Yeah, no, that's quite right. It's when it comes to the sort of the core of the issue, it's about the personal decisions people make in their lives, and there is some argument one can make about externalities. So, someone has to pay the bill for some cigarette smoker. So maybe if he gets lung cancer at higher rates than normal people, then there are higher medical costs. But actually, if you look at it, smokers and heavy drinkers may actually be a net positive to the sort of welfare state, because they tend to die younger, so they take less benefits as they grow old. So some 100-year-old grandma who never smoked a cigarette in her life and never drank any booze is actually more of a cost in this sort of like utilitarian terms than some smoker who actually dies younger. So in terms of externalities, there's no case to be made, but we should actually care. But the policymakers should care about what smokers do with their lives. It's about the sort of nanny instinct of trying to rule other people's lives. And smokers. I believe smokers should be able to make their choices, and they should be able to access cigarettes they desire.
So let's dig into that a little bit, because you mentioned the fact that folks who smoke end up dying quicker or earlier. So therefore, maybe there isn't as much of a net cost associated with that person relative to the healthcare that they would be requiring as they got older in age. But is that a good thing? Right? Like, are we looking at it way too much in the and I'll use the Tim Pool expression he uses, that the graph go up, graph go down mentality, right? Like, is it? I say, is it? I would argue it's objectively not a good thing that people are dying younger because they're using these substances. I mean, to that, I hear the argument that, well, they're not going to cost society, as much money relative to the 100-year-old grandma who didn't smoke or drink, which I think that might be an okay thing. Like, I as a taxpayer in society would be more okay with my tax dollars going to help the 100-year-old grandma because she's not doing overtly self-destructive things to her body, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So I did write this article, which is about how I'm not a smoker, but still I don't want higher cigarette taxes. So I personally don't endorse this behavior. I'm not promoting Marlboro or Camel cigarettes, but still I think So I think there should be voluntary measures taken to help people get out of smoking if they wish to do so. And there's actually a huge problem with how the state currently operates in banning certain alternatives people use to get out of smoking. So if you look at the United States, I think you guys had some troubles with the FDA trying to get rid of vaping because it was said to target kids and such. And what's very interesting is there was this study in the EU which actually looked at do people use vaping and nicotine pouches and Zins and such stuff to get out of smoking, or are there like young people who only get into smoking and get into nicotine consumption because of those alternatives? And the study was quite strongly suggesting that it is people getting out of smoking and not people getting into smoking and into nicotine products who would have never used them. So it's actually saving lives and not getting new users into this nicotine frenzy.
Mm-hmm. Well, and let's kind of walk this line here, right? Because I think it's very much, absolutely to your point, it's very much important for us to prioritize safer, I'm using the word safer very, very delicately, but safer alternatives, right? That objectively have less of a harm. So you being able to have a market solution like vaping, to your point, or edibles or whatever it may be, across the spectrum, the Zyn patches, great, 2 thumbs up. Is it okay though for policymakers to say, yes, we want to incentivize folks to go towards these alternatives, and I'm going to use the word incentivize again very loosely here, not necessarily dollars and cents like subsidies or taxes, but rather just a moral positioning. These are objectively better than cigarettes, right? Is it okay for these policymakers to make that statement, and then at the same point in time address the elephant in the room that even though the healthcare costs, to your point, from an externality standpoint, are maybe lesser, it's still not an objectively good thing that people are dying younger because they're smoking. Does that make sense? You work out, you lift heavy, you're eating clean, but if you're not seeing better pumps, better endurance, or faster recovery, it's probably because you're missing a critical piece. So your body depends on nitric oxide to help push blood, oxygen, and nutrients into your muscles. And when your NO levels drop off, or if you're not maximizing them, it's like training with the brakes on. Less oxygen, weaker pumps, longer recovery. You're doing the work, but your body simply isn't keeping up. And that's where Cardio Miracle comes in. It's an advanced nitric oxide supplement loaded with L-citrulline, L-arginine, organic beetroot, CoQ10, and no junk. Just pure ingredients that synergistically work to increase blood flow, power your workouts, and accelerate your recovery without stimulants or synthetic BS. So if you want to make sure every set counts, just click the link in the show notes, scan that little QR code over my shoulder, or visit cardiomiracle.com/TBNS to feel the difference. And by the way, when you click that link, your discount will automatically be applied. Just look for Shopping with Brian Nichols at the top of your homepage. One more time, that's cardiomiracle.com/TBNS. And now, let's get back to the show.
Yeah. It does make sense. However, we just have to look at policy in the real world and not only in the sort of utopian best case scenario. And you have to look at how the fight against cigarettes has looked in many countries. So, for instance, if you look at Australia has been pioneering this very paternalistic, very strong anti-cigarette policy. I'm sure you know that in Europe, when you have a packet of cigarettes, you get like the images of like lungs and like severe body parts, which are lungs which are harmed by cancer, lung cancer caused by cigarettes, and there's like some really scary images of like women losing their pregnancies and like all this sort of like extremely disturbing stuff, which is supposed to scare smokers. But Australia went even further, and they decided to like take cigarettes, and on each cigarette write that smoking kills, which hasn't been done anywhere else. And they also did like very high taxes on cigarettes. So I think, and the results are in. They have huge problems with crime and with illegal sales of cigarettes. So I think even The Guardian, which is like this ultra left-wing paternalistic newspaper in Britain, admitted that this was a complete policy failure. This doesn't work. They actually have fire bombings going on in their tobacco shops. So because there's like there are very legal tobacco shops which are destroyed by the illegal gangs which are selling illegal cigarettes that they have smuggled from out of Australia. So there's actually real life consequences to the fight against cigarettes, and the state should try to at least not ban the safer alternative to smoking. I think that's quite reasonable, but we should also not. The case for the sort of very paternalistic policy against smoking is not as strong as we may think.
So let's laser focus on this for a second, because we're kind of having a same church, different pew conversation here in America right now. And I'm wondering how much of this comes down to an educated public versus a nanny state government, right? So you're taking, for example, the Australia example, where you have folks who are now smoking cigarettes that literally say the word smoking kills on it. I'm not sure. And before I go to my next point, do you know if in Australia they're highly regulative on cigarettes?
Oh, yeah.
And could you give me a little context to that regulation?
Yeah, it's. I think they have some of the most expensive cigarettes on earth. It's just high taxes. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, so when you look at that, right? Let's now translate to where we are in America, where this conversation is hitting more close to home to your average person, and this is going into the argument around food dyes. We're seeing right now in America, a lot of folks are either celebrating or have ultimate disdain for the fact that a lot of these FDA regulators are now starting to, under the leading of HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy, starting to now to have to either get rid of these dyes in their foods because of unintended or not published health consequences. But on the other side, there's a public that is very much unaware of truly what these different substances are doing to their body. And I'm wondering, Ian, is this an area that we could find some common ground? That I agree, we should not have a system where, in Australia, they're taxing the cigarettes, for example, to the nth degree, because it does create black markets, right? It does create unintended consequences and externalities in that regards. But people know by and large that smoking's bad. Or I would hope most folks know that smoking isn't good for you, right? So is it one thing to say, hey, we should be able to morally say, as a society, it doesn't have to be a policy prescription, but to say smoking's bad. And then on the other side of the aisle say, and also if you're unaware of the certain areas that could be good or bad, there is a role for, whether it's a government agency or a regulatory body, to at the very least inform the public. Maybe not outright ban things like we're doing with food dyes here, but when somebody goes to buy a thing of Fruit Loops, to say, hey, this Fruit Loops contains substances known to cause cancer or have been shown to cause cancer. Like, I think that would be a very big wake-up call to some parents who they're just living their lives and they don't know what is every ingredient in the food that they're giving their kids, to see that on a store shelf and be like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be giving my kid the Fruit Loops today. Maybe I should consider a different option that's not full of potential carcinogens. Is that at least a middle ground, or do you see negatives in that solution as well?
So I think that food dyes are a bit of a different topic because I think Robert Kennedy Jr. often says, but Europe banned the food dyes, so he is trying to move US in the sort of EU direction, which is also living in Europe. I don't think you guys should move in the European direction. Yeah, this is not a good way.
Tell me more.
Way to go, to be more tight on regulation. So I used to live in Luxembourg, which is the place where much of the regulation out of the European Union is made, and it's just a huge bureaucratic machine. And they try to regulate every single aspect of our lives in here. So it's quite terrible. And this goes from food dyes to all sorts of areas of lives. They have been trying to and they also often have some very ideological agenda. So, for instance, there was this very interesting document they wrote about the problem that there aren't enough women on boats fishing, because there's isn't enough gender diversity in fishing, so there isn't enough women fishermen. So I think this sort of regulatory zeal can go too far, and US, you guys have been doing better than Europe. So don't follow Kennedy Jr.
Well, and I'm not trying to dig into this, but this is an area that I've really become passionate about over my own life, because I used to weigh 385 pounds. I was very morbidly obese, and a lot of it was just to me not being educated in terms of how to live a healthy lifestyle, how much food you should be putting in your body versus how much exercise you should be doing, right? And from a physiological standpoint, there are very much like just black and white, yes and no's, truths and falsehoods. And I mean, I'm looking at where we are in America right now. My generation, I'm an older millennial, and we're seeing the folks who grew up in the 80s and 90s, their parents, Gen X or younger boomers, they were in this convenience economy, right? And trust me, there is a absolute benefit to a convenience economy, right? It's opening up alternative options. You're now helping create more cost-effective food sources. But the companies that were putting these products on the market, they were using new types of ingredients, new types of chemicals to help both improve the longevity of the shelf life of these items, to create the appearance that these items are better than their competition by pumping them full of bright colors and such. And you look at bread, for example, right? I forget the specific substance that's been put into bread to help with its shelf life, but there's been this influx of people in America who are suffering from celiac disease or gluten intolerance. And you hear that the tried and true argument from the boomers, well, we had bread when we were kids and we didn't have gluten intolerance. And I say, yeah, no kidding, because the bread you were eating was fundamentally different than the bread we're eating today. So even though we can say, well, Brian, line on graph says bread price get cheaper, that should be good, right? I say, well, maybe, because bread maybe got cheaper or it was able to stay in the shelf longer. But now, fast forward 20 years, 30 years, people are dealing with the very real health impacts from the things that were being put into bread in the name of, graph go down or graph go up. And there is now more and more folks who are dealing with these secondary health issues that they grew up with, just because of the nature of the things they were eating, and saying, how the heck did this happen? And we keep going back to, in the 90s, in the 80s, and even 70s, we started to see more and more of these organizations, these corporations, putting things into food to make them more profitable or to make them more marketable. And I'm not saying that this is it's right or wrong of them. That's not for me to decide. But as a consumer, I feel that if we're going to have a true free market, right, which I think everybody's ideal should be, is that a true free market means that you should also have access to all the information, right? And if there are any question marks on whether it's ingredients or what have you, it should be baseline, in my humble opinion, that as a consumer, I have access to that information. And I go back to 2020 when COVID hit, right? And everybody who was skeptical of the COVID vaccine was like, hey, I'm skeptical. Answer my questions. Show me what's actually in this. Show me the potential side effects. And then Pfizer gives us the side effect document, and 3/4, if not more, of the documents blacked out, right? So that is where, as consumers in America, especially, Ian, we're just feeling like we're being used in many instances as the piggy bank for these corporations. They don't care what they put into the food or put into the environment or put into our medicine, as long as the dollars and cents keep coming into their bank every single day, right? So I think that is a fundamental issue that a lot of Americans, especially in my generation, are starting to grapple with. So to that argument, I guess I'm making here, what would your feedback be?
So I think I fully agree in terms of transparency. There should be transparency. You should have all the ingredients. I'm not sure if the one problem I think with packaging and such is that you could put a lot of stuff on it, and then people don't pay any attention to the most important stuff, because they just have 3,000 ingredients on there, and this way you can just lose track of everything. So I think technology could be very useful in here with QR codes and maybe some apps which could actually track what's unhealthy, what's healthy, and give you some help with tracking what's in your food. So I'm for transparency. I think as long as we are not talking about bans on certain stuff, we're in good territory.
Well, and by the way, this is the other part of this where folks get frustrated, is that the FDA in America, right, they are promoted rather as this governing body that more or less keeps the consumer safe. And I'm not arguing in favor of the FDA by any stretch of the imagination, but when you have the ground floor set that, hey, as a consumer, I am almost abdicating my personal responsibility as a consumer to the FDA, because they're promoting themselves as the governing body that is saying this is safe and this is not. So if the FDA is giving the thumbs up, they're saying this is safe enough, or it's almost food, so we're going to let it go in the store shelves. Then as a consumer, it creates this false sense of security and safety, thinking, well, I'm deferring to, here we go, back to 2020. I'm deferring to the experts, right? Because I'm not a health expert. I'm not a scientist. I'm a parent. I'm trying to work my job and feed my kids and pay the bills and do all this other stuff, right? And I don't have the time to go and say, okay, what is this calcium bromide? What red dye for? What is it? What does all this do? Right? And it does turn into well, listen, I'm going to trust these experts. And to your point, I think a much better solution would be having QR codes where you could just say, hey, scan, beep, here, this is full of this. Be careful. These are danger signs. Make that free market solution. But how many folks out there are going to be like, well, the app from, Billy LLC, he says that this is bad, but expert scientist in lab coat at the FDA is telling me that this is safe, right? And that is where I think a lot of folks in America, especially, are having that fine line of delineation, is how much of this are we just outright deferring to the experts, and because they're claiming that they're keeping us safe, and then on the other side of the aisle, how much of it should be under our responsibility? I think a lot of it should be under responsibility, but that's all been taken away. You hear that argument?
I think there's the sort of false sense of security that people get, and in the end, this is their lives. This is about individual responsibility. But if they don't, most people just don't have the sort of mental space to do all this research on food. And if there's a lot of terrible info, which is also a huge problem. I think in America, FDA has much more of prestige, which makes people trust whatever they get. I think because I'm originally from Eastern Europe. We don't have such sort of faith in institutions. We sort of know that maybe some corrupt guy gave some money to someone to get this product on the shelf. So we are more distrustful of health authorities and of different governmental institutions. So that's more healthy. But in America, I think FDA sort of overcoddles some people.
And listen, I am not here to cheer and support the FDA, right? Like that's not my position here in the show. But I mean, I am trying to paint this picture that there is very much this abdication of responsibility to these governing bodies, because that's more or less the way that they've been promoted to us in America, right? Just look in the back. Was it approved by the FDA? Awesome. Like there's one funny scene in the movie Home Alone. And the kid's like, does this toothbrush approved by the American Dental Association? Right. Like we have this ingrained mentality that, these are the governing bodies you're supposed to look to. But then I'll going back to your article here, Ian, right, when we're talking about smoking. One of the things we saw really successful and effective here in America was the truth.org campaigns. And I'm not sure if you guys had something similar over in Europe, but basically what it was you'd be sitting there watching TV, and then all of a sudden, here comes, John. John's got a hole in his throat, and he's got like the little voice thing. He's like, "My name is John. I smoked cigarettes for 40 years, and now I can't talk." Right? And like as a kid, you're like, "Oh my God, this is what happens when you smoke. I don't want to smoke." Right? And that was infinitely more effective, I think, in getting kids away from smoking versus the government banning smoking, because it almost goes back to when government bans things. I'm not sure. Do you ever watch that TV show Family Guy? If you're a small business owner with a handful of team members, but a big vision, I'm talking maybe 3, 5, maybe 10 folks tops, most phone vendors will either ignore you or try to upsell you into something bloated and expensive. Yeah, been there. But Level 365, they get it. No minimum seats, no pressure to scale before you're ready. Just simple, powerful phone tools built to grow when you do. And it's still month to month, so no worries about getting locked into something that doesn't fit you next month. It's not about company size, it's about finding the right fit. That's what Level 365 nails.
Not too much, no.
No, okay. Well, just don't worry. You don't have to be an expert for this scene. But there's one scene where Peter Griffin, he's the main character. He's standing there, and there's this big yellow sign that says "Do not push button," and it's this big red button, and he's like, boop, and he pushes the button, right? And I think like monkeys or something attack him. But like that is, for I think to your point, where a lot of folks are like, "Oh, who do you think you are telling me that I can or can't have something? I'm a sovereign citizen. I can have whatever I want in my body," which I agree. But I mean, it is more of an instinct in this case to react to the government saying, "Don't do this," because of course you're like, "Ooh, why? Why is the government saying no? It must be good, right?" Versus on the flip side, like growing up and seeing the stories of folks who did smoke, lung cancer, the John who lost his voice, like there's the famous scene of like some lady who she like lost her leg, right? And she's like in a bed forever. Like that kind of stuff, it sticks to you because it's emotional. So I say all that, like, is there maybe a common ground or a middle ground where we could say, hey, smoking's not good for you. We can promote that it's not good for you, have nonprofits promote that it's not good, but we don't need to go all the way to outright banning things.
Yeah, totally. I think I agree a lot with you. The only I don't partake in smoking.
Right.
But the one time I want to smoke is when I'm on a plane and I see the "don't smoke" sign on the airplane. It's irresistible. Then no, I think there's even some mechanism of like people seeing it as somewhat cool to smoke when it's when it's less legal. And you could even look at the example of Nazi Germany. In Nazi Germany, smoking was illegal, and you wouldn't know this by looking at any of the pictures, any of like the documentaries, any of even in the movies. You wouldn't know that smoking was illegal in public spaces because everyone would smoke anyway. There's like this is just human nature. People don't want to listen to what government says, and yeah. Banning stuff didn't work for God in the Garden of Eden. I don't think the government will manage to do it.
Are you telling me that government isn't as powerful as God? That's a line we never heard here on the show. I like that. Ian, like, I know we're going towards the tail end of the episode here, but like, what would be a call to action for folks from this article, from the overall conversation today? Because there's a lot of folks who are out there saying, Ian, but there are things that are bad for us, right? Like, is there any role for government to say, like, because like murder, right? Like murder's bad. And government actually says, hey, don't kill other people. And if you do, we're going to put you in this big box with metal bars and probably do it for a long, long time because it's bad, right? Like, is there a line where we could say there is a role for government to say, not only these things are bad, but we are going to either make them outright illegal, like murder or rape or all these other horrible things that can be done on another person? Or is it more back to your point earlier, like this is just stuff that's impacting me, right? It shouldn't matter to you. Help us, walk through that moral dilemma.
Well, there is the line, which is just the individual autonomy of the other person. So if you're smoking next to someone and it's particularly it's particularly bothersome, then of course you start to aggress on other people, and then we get into trouble. But as long as you do harm to your own body, then it is your individual responsibility. It is your life, but you're losing. You're helping. You're saving our retirement system. You're saving our budget. You're welcome to do so if you wish, but I would recommend that you try to seek out different alternatives. So nicotine pouches can be very beneficial to quitting smoking. Vaping can be a good substitute to smoking. Yeah, don't get into vaping if you don't have a nicotine problem already, but if you do, this is a much safer alternative. And yeah, don't be the person who saves the budget for your country. Let others do it.
I like that. All right, Ian, do us a favor here, if you could, like, steel man the argument of people who would be in favor of banning cigarettes. Like, what would be, and I mean, not even banning cigarettes, just banning self-destructive substances, right? Like, what would be the strongest argument that folks in the pro-banning side could leverage? What do you think that would look like? Is there one?
Yeah, well, I think you have to make a few false assumptions. So maybe you could say that this will just decrease the number of smokers. Smokers are the most prevalent amongst the low-income people who do not have as much money as other people. So they will be the most impacted by increasing taxes on cigarettes, and therefore, it will just work to disrupt their smoking habits in such a way. And but it's quite tough to make this argument, knowing that that people will simply switch to black market.
Yeah, and that goes to the use case you were talking about in Australia, right? Like where these black markets, and by the way, we saw this here in America, right? Prohibition, we banned alcohol, and everybody was like, good luck with that. And then that's when you had all the bootleggers and the moonshine and all, that subculture, the speakeasies. And fast forward, like what, 10 years later, and all of a sudden you're like, this isn't working. We're going to bring it back.
Even on the cigarette market, I think in US, you also have some problems. You have people saying loosies,
yep.
like loose cigarettes, and there's like huge differences between New York and other states in terms of cigarette prices. So people actually smuggle between the states. So there isn't like a country where this could work. Maybe North Korea could try to eradicate smoking because they just don't have anything going on. Yeah, they have completely closed borders, so maybe they could, but I'm not hopeful about any other country.
What about countries like, I don't mean to kind of go on a complete random tangent here, but like countries like Singapore, for example, right? They ban putting like, gum on the ground. And if you do that, you get caned, right? So why is it that there are societies like Singapore or Japan, or I mean, I'll even dip my toe into China. There's a lot of negatives with China, don't get me wrong, but like there seems to be much more societal order. Is that a cultural thing? Like what's the difference there?
Yeah, I think it comes out to culture. Yeah, it's just, yeah, Asians have a certain cohesion to their society. I think, yeah, it's also about the incentives. So I know that some of the Southeast Asian countries have some very high punishments. So, for instance, there are people who got some drugs into Malaysia, and then they actually faced death sentence for some like little amount of marijuana, or some smugglers actually would put stuff in their luggage unknowingly to them, and then they would get caught on the border, and then they would be in huge trouble, and embassies would have to bail out some tourists who had some marijuana on them because they faced death penalty in Malaysia. So if you would really want, you could go totalitarian about cigarettes, but I don't think this is the sort of life we want.
Well, let's do this, and this will be my one of my points I'd make in the show is we know negative consequences aren't as effective, but positive consequences could be, right? So what positive incentives do you see that could be out there to like reward people for not doing the negative behavior? Let's not punish people for doing the negative behavior, but let's reward people who are taking the choice to say, hey, I'm not going to smoke. I'm not going to drink. Like, I'm not going to do self-destructive behaviors. Is there an argument there?
This reminds me, there was this, I don't know if you know the show, Nathan For You, but there was this segment on the show. This is a guy who goes around pitching crazy ideas to businesses and such. And he had a segment on the show where he came up with this idea of taking embarrassing pictures of people where they say, or recordings where they say embarrassing stuff, for instance, about their boss, or about their children, or some sort of insane sort of stuff, and then he would threaten the people who were on the pictures that they would have to lose weight, or they would he would send the pictures to their loved ones, or to their bosses. So I think there's some incentive structures you could think of that could work. And there's this interesting article by Richard Fanania where he said that he made a case for like defense of public shaming. So he was actually pretty fat 10 years ago. He was gaining weight a lot, and then he came out. He wrote this article in defense of public shaming, and afterwards and he made this commitment to this idea of public shaming, and then he said that he will lose all this weight. And if he wouldn't, this would obviously damage his career. People would point out that he wrote this article about public shaming, and then he actually did lose the weight. So there's that, but that's of course not very positive. That's quite negative. I'm not sure what positive incentives you could.
Here's an idea I had, right? Like, and I'll just go back to the smoking example we've been talking about today. Like, if you're everybody, what everybody pays taxes, right? And everybody looks at that and they're like, ugh, what's the government using with my money? And there's all these arguments. It's for healthcare, it's for this, it's for that. I mean, what if you were to say, hey, you're a non-smoker? We're going to give you a tax break. We're not going to tax you more, right? We're just going to reduce your taxes from the baseline. You're a smoker. Hey, this is what you're paying because you're doing negative behaviors, right? Or and that's just like a random thought, but like something in that spirit.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the exact policy in this case, but this could be.
You heard what I'm saying? They're like not punishing, but we're rewarding positive behavior. And actually, there's a channel I listen to on YouTube called Corridor Crew, and there are these CGI graphic design artists out of LA. And I love watching their shows. It's wild to see what they can do with computers. But anyways, one of the segments they did, it was just a funny little one-off video, and they were trying to figure out who at the studio wasn't washing the dishes in the sink. So what they did was they had this poster that was above the sink. They cut out a little tiny hole. They put a Raspberry Pi server, or whatever we call it, doesn't matter, piece of technology in behind the painting. And then they were able to get a live feed, hooked it into some AI, could identify who the person was. And what they were going to do was publicly shame the people, right, when they would get in trouble. And then they realized that it didn't really have any impact. So what they did on the flip side was they started to reward the people who were doing the dishes, and they would actually accumulate points for doing the positive behavior. So I'm wondering, like, in that same idea, is there something we could do where it incentivizes the positive behavior? We're not punishing the people who do bad, but we are rewarding those who do good. I think that there could be something there. I don't know what that would look like, right? But I think, that's at least a better conversation to build this around versus the you do bad thing, therefore you get punished. Instead, say, hey, you did good thing, let's reward.
Yeah, I think that sounds quite reasonable.
There you go. Common ground, Ian. Common ground. I love it. All right, Ian, we are getting close to the end of the show here. So we did a little segment at the end called Final Thoughts. I'll go ahead and turn things over to you. What would be, if you were to wrap today's episode up in a nice, neat bow, kind of like the overall takeaway for the audience as we go ahead and wrap the show?
So I think, we should look at this as the sort of war on fun that we are facing from our dear leaders, and we need to find a way to stand up a bit and defend the maybe small little joys in our lives, which we deserve. We deserve to have some fun, even if it's not healthy, even if it's not conducive to living 100 years. But I think, I think we should be more bold about having the right to live our lives the way we want, and we need some counteroffensive in the war on fun.
And listen, I'm right there with you. We should be able to have fun. I also am very nervous, though, of this whole like live and let live mentality, because that's also been the argument that a lot of the folks in the more progressive left have leveraged in the LGBTQAI plus argument for just like redefining what gender is, what our societal roles are, and you see some very weird kind of consequences therein. So I'm a little nervous about the live and let live, but I mean, you mentioned something, that the idea of stigma, shame, right? Public shaming. I do think that there is a role for stigma. Not in saying like, oh, we're going to ostracize people who do negative things or self-destructive things, but rather that we have a general understanding that this thing isn't good, right? Like, go smoke cigarettes. I don't need to tell you shouldn't do it, but I think we should all be on the same playing field, that it's not a net positive for your health. Like it's when we see this on the gender argument, when people are like, well, I'm just being my true self. And I'm like, okay, you can be your true self, but that doesn't make it objectively good. I'm not going to tell you that government should stop you from trying to be your true self, but on the same point, I'm not going to be, forced by government to accept you and your self-destructive behaviors as good. I think, there's an argument to say that we can say a thing is bad, not say that you're a bad person, but that you're engaging in bad behavior. I'm not going to use government to force you to stop that behavior, but I think, we should be at least able to have that conversation and dialogue. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I don't think parents should be happy if they catch their children smoking. I think they should be quite paternalistic in that sense, but it should be about individual responsibility, about instilling the right values in the family as well. So I think there's a lot of stuff that has to happen in the household and not necessarily through government policy.
Amen. Ian Golan, this has been a great conversation, my man. Where can folks go ahead, reach out to you if they want to learn more, if they want to continue the conversation? And of course, Modern Diplomacy is where they can go ahead and check out your article. I will include that in the show notes. But Ian, bring us home here. Final thoughts?
So I have an account on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. I'm somehow sentimental to the old name. So at Ian Golan on X, and we also have the website for our magazine, which is wespeakfreely.org. So you can find much more about European politics, about our takes on how to spread liberty in Europe. So Yeah, that's it. Thank you very much for having me on, Brian.
Absolutely, my man. Well, listen, we really appreciated you joining the show. I love getting a different perspective from someone who is not a part of the American political system, because I think we're, in the American political system, everybody's just in an 11 out of 10 like intensity at all times, because it is so combative here. So to have somebody who's across the pond can have this conversation, you're removed from our goofball politics here. You have your own goofball politics over there, don't get me wrong, but at least we can have a conversation that's not exactly talking about the same things that people are all worked up over here in America. But anyways, I really appreciate this. Thank you for joining us today. And with that being said, folks, if you got some value, please go ahead, give today's episode a share. But with that being said, Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show for Ian Golan. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at briannicholsshow.com.